Well, these 2 days we have great opportunity to speak on different topics from the Agile world, like Agile methodologies, people aspects, organizational change management, etc. And now, to get an insight into how we can put all them together and make them work together, we have invited Tobias Meyer. Tobias is, Agile explorer, as he defines himself, working with lots of organizations, always looking for the deep reasons for the transformations of the organizations, both from business perspective and from the viewpoint of the individuals, of course. He's the author of the People Scrum book, which yesterday you had the opportunity to see and buy. And for you, directly from San Francisco, Tobias Meyer.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for staying to the end to be here for this. I was being very conscious as I was standing waiting there, because I attended a really great session yesterday on body language, and I wanted to be sure that I used my body in the way he recommended, which is standing upright, chin up, you know, just kind of owning the room, if you like, holding the room. So if you see me slump, you can kind of hiss or something like that. It's really great to be here. It's really an honor to be invited to an event like this. And Bilbao is a beautiful city. It's really, you know, it's a very short stay, but it's been a lot of fun. And had the opportunity to attend a few sessions here. Even though I don't speak a word of Spanish, I actually attended 2 sessions in Spanish and enjoyed both of them and actually understood a lot. One had English slides, that was Angel's presentation, so that helped. And then the 10-minute introduction to Scrum, which was very, very clear presentation, very clear slides. So it's interesting how the language barrier needn't be such a barrier after all, if we're sort of willing to dive into it. So that was a good lesson for me. So I'm going to talk about business craftsmanship, and this is an idea I've been sort of playing around with for a year or so. Not quite sure what it is or what I'm doing with it, but there's a sense that I think that we used to have, as you all know from reading all this Agile literature, something called scientific management, which was very useful in the industrial age, but is not very useful now, and we still have a lot of hangover from that. So we have scientific management, and we have systems re-engineering. So there's a lot of focus on science, a lot of focus on engineering in our industry. And I've been a software developer. I kind of still am. I kind of keep my hands in a little bit, but not really. I couldn't really code my way out of a paper bag today with some of the stuff you guys do. But I have been a software developer. And when I originally trained, it was quite late in life I became a software developer. And a friend of a friend said to me, "That's a strange thing for you to do. Your family is so artistic. What kind of, how do you get your artistic outlet?" And I felt offended for one. But I also felt amazed, because to me, writing code was the most creative thing I'd ever done. It is a craft. For me, it's a craft, and it has elements of poetry, it has elements of art in it. And so when I think about, we call ourselves software engineers, and I know there's a movement, there's a software craftsmanship movement that many of you would have come across that's kind of edging us away from that a little bit and trying to embrace this as a craft. And I think that we can go further than just saying software is a craft. I think the kind of businesses that we run today also need to be crafted rather than kind of big upfront designed or engineered. And so I think let's take that idea of craftsmanship and kind of spread it across the enterprise to some extent. So that's what I'm attempting to do, in the various bits and pieces of work I do and the talks that I give. And so this is kind of, if you like, the latest iteration of that. It's certainly not fixed, and what I'm presenting here is very different from what I was talking about a year ago, although there are connections. So, let's dive in. I thought I had 45 minutes for this because I looked at the program and now I found out I have an hour. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. When you extend a time box, it doesn't always work out so well, does it? But, we'll see. Here. So, a nice wordy slide here to start with. They're not all like this, I promise. Most of them are pretty pictures. So the modern knowledge work organization must look beyond science, beyond engineering, and beyond logic. These are the things that drive us. These are what we consider left brain activities. And our organizations have been very left brain driven for decades now, centuries perhaps. And it's time to re-engage the right brain and to start thinking about creativity and artistry in the way we work. So business leaders need to be artists. The art they create is the organization they build. So, this is an Agile conference, so I do want to talk about Agile to some extent. So, how does Agile help this? You know, what does Agile offer to this? Because I came to these ideas through the Agile field. You know, I discovered extreme programming, I think it was about 1997, 98, and I was doing some research on process. And I was really taken by it. It was very new. It was something I'd never... It was a gut feeling in me that we're doing things wrong. And when I read Kent Beck's book on extreme programming, it kind of gelled that for me. It made me feel, yeah, you know, this guy's on the right track here with this. It was about discovery as you went along, rather than trying to know everything ahead. And it was kind of an eye-opener for me. And so I continued to sort of read and study. I didn't get to practice XP, unfortunately, in those first few years of work. But I kept returning to it, and eventually I came across something called extreme testing before I discovered Scrum or anything else, and through that I discovered Scrum. And began to try and bring it into the organization I was currently working at. And it was a struggle, you know, because this was back in 2003, 2004, and very few people had heard of it. It sounded like a cult, it sounded like a fad, and many people weren't taking it seriously. You know, this was just going to be another thing, another silver bullet that passes us by. But you know what? It isn't. 10 years later, it's sticky. But I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that. You know, is it where we want it to be? That's the question I want to ask here. So how does Agile help in this? So let's just look at what is Agile. In a nutshell. I've got three things there. So Agile helps us to quickly and frequently deliver real value to real users. That's the bottom line, isn't it? You know, there's so many times in the old way of working when a user or a customer even just didn't get to see software. They got to see documents. They got to have conversations which were more like debates or arguments, and they never actually got to see the software. So the Agile movement is saying put the software in front of customers as soon as we can. So real value to real users in order to learn. When a customer and a user sees the software, they know what they didn't want as much as they know whether they want it or not. And so very often you'll get feedback that says, no, I don't want that. Or you get feedback that says, that's great, it's exactly what I wanted. The best kind of feedback I find is, I didn't know you could do that. Could you do this as well? I hadn't thought about it that way. You know, so we get those kind of engaging dialogues with our customers, and we learn from them. We adapt the work we do, and we improve as we go. We improve the product itself, of course, but we're also improving the way we build the product. So in a system like Scrum, we have two kinds of reflection meeting. We have a reflection meeting for the product, which is called a review, or some people call it a demo. We look at the product and we decide, is it what we want? Is it going where we want it to go? And then we have another meeting called the retrospective, which allows us to kind of internally reflect, if you like. The team kind of looks inward, introspection, and decides, are we working in the best way we can work, and what could we do better to keep our customers happy and to keep ourselves happy? Which takes us to the third part of this, to create joy and engagement in the workplace. And for me, that's kind of what I'm seeking. I'm seeking joy and engagement in the workplace. You know, I want to be able to go to work happy that I'm going to work, and I want to come away at the end of the day feeling that I've made some kind of a difference somehow, either to the company or to another person. I don't want work to be a drudge, ever. And I think no matter what kind of work you do, we want a sense of going in and finding that there's a joy in what we do. You probably remember this slide from Angel's presentation. In fact, you probably remember many of the same values that Angel was talking about earlier in the conference. And so there's definitely a theme running through here. 86% of companies have tried Agile, supposedly. 71% have succeeded. Now, I'm not sure which companies they interviewed for this. Maybe 86% of the 5 companies they talked to have tried Agile. I don't know how many companies they talked to. I don't know what kind of companies they talked to. But I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It's just not true. And how many have tried Agile but never succeeded? 15%. I would probably switch those numbers around, to be honest, really. You're all nodding, so you kind of get it, right? What people are calling success with Agile is perhaps not what people who are deeply embedded in the Agile culture would call success with Agile. So there's definitely a disconnect there. I think what we're seeking, this idea of kind of joy and engagement and true value frequently delivered to customers and a kind of reduction of waste and a sense of kind of love in the workplace, if you like. I don't see that in 71% of companies, certainly not in the USA, which is where this research came from. So, the question is, I suppose, what went wrong? You know, if 71% of our companies are doing Agile successfully, they should look like this. When you go into a software company, this is what the feeling is that you should get from that. You know, a bunch of people deeply engaged in the work that they're doing, making it up as they go along, with the manager, I guess there she is, very hands-off back there, leaving the team to kind of figure this out for themselves. But I don't see many companies that look like that. I don't know about you, but and there's not none. I have seen a sense of this in a few different places that I've worked at, but it is rare. What's more common? You recognize that picture, right? Office Space, I believe it's from the movie. It's an exaggeration. I mean, you know, of course we don't want software developers to behave like a bunch of kids in a playground. Or maybe we do. Maybe we do. And this is the extreme far side of it. But there's still, certainly in the USA, there's still a lot of cubicle culture that's hung over from the 90s there. It's slowly being eroded. But not necessarily in the best possible way. But it is good to not be kind of isolated in a grey box. It's a bit like being in a solitary confinement or something like that. And that movie kind of brings it out pretty clearly. Stress, fear, isolation is what we often see in organizations. So 71% of companies are doing Agile. But are they calling this Agile? I wonder. Because that's not right. And I think we have to do something about that. So the question is, what went wrong? You know, what went wrong when 71% of these companies say they're doing Agile? And Agile started off as this dream, if you like, of a bunch of people who all came together and said, you know, this is the way we want to do our work. Developers, testers, project managers, various maybe development managers, different people came together and said, we don't want to work in this old way anymore. We want to work like this. And they kind of created Agile. And what we see following on from that, looks more like this. It's the kind of chaotic mess where nothing's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So I'm going to just go back to what I feel is kind of the root of Agile. It's just the first XP book that came out. I know that Kent Beck was certainly influenced by other people in the industry, and you can trace kind of Agile type work back to the 70s, even with something like Evo, Tom Gilb's work. But in terms of kind of putting it on the map, the XP book really pretty much did that. And this is a beautiful drawing. I hadn't ever seen it before, and I found this last night and decided to put it in. He talks there about values, practices, and principles. Domain-specific jumped out at me. You know, when something is domain-specific, you can't create a one-size-fits-all process for it. And actually, I don't see the word process on that diagram at all. And yet, all we seem to talk about today is Agile process. You don't hear much, unless you're at a conference like this and you're listening to Angel talking, or me, perhaps a few other people too, you won't hear much about this, or even that. You might hear some talk about practices. But there's a lot of talk about process, and there's a lot of diagrams. If you search the internet and look for images of Agile process, it's overwhelming how many you'll find. And people take these process diagrams and they try to do Scrum according to the diagram. Or, very often you hear, we're going to do Agile, and we're buying tool X to do Agile with. It's a bad start. Really, it's a bad start. If you try and do Agile by following someone else's idea of what Agile is and who's encoded it into a tool, you're going to lose the spirit before you even begin. You lose the spirit. So, you all know this picture, I hope, right? Agile Manifesto. 17 people came together and talked about what they don't want to do and what they do want to do and what the ideas were that they shared, and they came up with those 4 principles. Individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. This is what we want to focus on when we build software. There's a spirit in that, there's a life in that, and there's a joy in that. And I don't see that following through in the way that perhaps those guys would have hoped for. And I certainly hoped for when I first came across this, in the late 90s, and really began to kind of seriously work trying to implement Scrum and train and so on in the early 2000s. So how did this become this? Question. No, I hope I don't offend anyone. Actually, it's completely fine if I offend you. I don't mind. You can take it up with me afterwards. But this is just one diagram of many that try and kind of nail Agile down. This particular one is saying, if you're going to do Agile at the enterprise level, you have to follow these laws and these steps and these rules, and everyone has to align in this way, and you have to follow, these steps in order to get there. And it starts to look like this. The first time I saw this diagram, my head hurt. And I said, I can't look at that, When I go back, I can look at that. I can look at that with interest and a kind of a passion and a curiosity. And I want to explore, what did he mean by that word? And where's he taking that? What is that? Oh, where is it? Excuse me. What is that? Those little dashes up there. What does he mean by that? I like that accountable thing as well. In these little pictures, and it sort of begins to, for me, it makes me ask questions. This one does not. This one makes me, like I said, it makes my head hurt. It makes me want to turn away from this. In a sort of, with a sense of despair, to be honest. So, aha. Yes. I'll put the big red stamp on that one. I am truly among my people. But that's not the only diagram. I mean, like I said, you can find hundreds of thousands of these things. Here's another one. This one, I don't even know what that one is saying. It's even that big, it's unreadable. So what do we do with that one? Not Agile. Again. And we can keep going. Here's another one. This is a simpler one. It describes the Scrum process mechanics. I'm not saying we shouldn't have process. I'm not saying that there isn't an element of mechanism sometimes to the work we do, but it's very, very small, very tiny. I don't think it needs a big diagram. The thing about these kind of diagrams is they get printed up and they get distributed throughout an organization, and they say, this is how we do Scrum at Company X. This is Company X's Scrum. And so they kind of put their stamp on it, and they want everyone to follow the same process. Because there's still this deep-rooted understanding that if we don't all do the same thing, it will be chaos. And they're right, it will be chaos. But the thing to do is embrace the chaos, find ways of containing the chaos, and find ways of harnessing the chaos, rather than crushing the chaos, which is what these kind of things tend to do. So, enough of those. So how much process do we need? Really not very much, I think. So when we build software, we're building products. Let's talk about products rather than just the software, because the product's the interesting part. The software is just the bit that gets you there. When we build products, we pretty much have to do, I think, two things. We have to make it. Right? We have to build it, and that requires lots of different skills. It requires coding skills, testing skills, design skills, various other technical skills to install the software and make sure that it's working and people can use it. So we have to make this thing. But the second thing is, if we just make it in isolation, then who knows what we're making? We could be making something great, or we could be making something that ends up as, well, they don't use that term anymore, it's shelfware. It never sees the light of day. And it's very easy, because having done this myself, it's very easy to get caught up in your own vision and to think, yeah, everyone's going to love this thing that I'm making. And then you give it to someone for feedback and they go, it's kind of crap. You need to do something else. So I had that experience quite recently, actually, and I fall over my own principles sometimes. I got customer involvement, but not early enough. Probably a little bit of waste built into that. So we make things, and in order to ensure that what we're making is the right thing, we need alignment in that. And we need alignment with people who are paying for the products that we're building and the people who are using the products that we're building. So customers and users. Collectively, stakeholders. So there has to be some alignment, and we have to do that alignment pretty frequently. All right, so we make and we align. And the third part of it is you don't just do that once. So you can create a little iteration around that. So we make and align, and we iterate. We make, we align, we iterate. And what that does eventually is, this is basically describing Scrum, isn't it? You have a time box, you make something, you have a review meeting with your customers, they give you some feedback, and you go back and you do another bunch of work, and you deliver that and give you some feedback, and so on. But eventually, there's a third part to this, actually. So just making and aligning is great, but then what? You have to deliver it. So you get another little wraparound iteration there. So the delivery might be on a slower pace than the making and aligning. The making and aligning might be, your feedback with customers might be daily. It might be every week, but you may not be delivering software or releasing software as frequently as that. That depends on what your customers and users actually want, what pace they can keep up with in terms of change. So I think that describes an agile process to me, and it's a lot simpler. And I would stamp agile on that one. I wouldn't stamp not agile on that one. It's about as simple as it can be. So let's just switch over to talking a bit about knowledge work. So everything we do in software development, in IT, is knowledge work. It's considered knowledge work. It's not, we're not building repeatable things. Every time we build a product, it's a new product. Have any of you read the new product development game? Show of hands for that. The original. Oh, not so many. Okay, it's a good read. It's the new product development game is a paper that was written in, I'm not even sure. 86. And it's the one that influenced Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber and helped them to kind of form the ideas around Scrum. But essentially what they're talking about in that is that idea that nothing's repeatable anymore. If you're building a software product that already exists, you probably shouldn't be building it, right? You should be building something different. So you're building something that might be similar to something else. It might be an improvement on something else. But therefore, it's a new product. It's not like building a car. Once you've got the car right, you can run them off on the production line, or an iPhone, or any other mechanical product. But software products are not like that. We're building new stuff all the time. And we don't know, because of this, we don't know what people actually want. So we have to spend time thinking, and we have to spend time in conversation. There's still a myth in many companies that if a software developer is not sitting at his keyboard and writing code, he's not working. For me, when I used to write code, I think probably 80% of the time I wasn't at the keyboard. Maybe 70%. But most of the time is taken up in dialogue with other developers, with the people who are asking for the software, with product managers, product owners, and a lot of time just thinking. Now, even if you're sitting at the computer, you may not actually be typing. You may just be sitting and thinking and reading back through some code, understanding it, refactoring. So knowledge work is about thinking, and it's interesting how we kind of lose that. There's a lot of I think other talks have touched on this as well, this idea of context switching at work. There's a sense that if someone is finished with something, they ought to immediately switch and work on something else. And the whole project management system is designed around that, about leveling our resources. So tester A is finished on project X, and he's got a week downtime before the next thing comes along. So switch him over to another project and get him to work on that. Doesn't work very well because there's a massive waste involved in that. But the thing is, everyone looks like they're busy. So we get this sense of people are always doing something. But it doesn't equate to productivity. It doesn't mean that we're getting stuff completed. And the more different things that you work on, the less likely you are to get any of them completed. I mean, this is not me saying this. There's decades of research around multitasking and task switching and how ineffective it is. When we don't have focus on what we do and we don't get things through to completion, things get done with poor quality. The code base expands, astronomically, and we have massive code debt that builds up because we keep sort of scraping things together. And it's tragic how, with all this research around this, people are still doing it. They still believe that it's better to have someone work on 3 different projects rather than just one because they don't want them to have idle time. And if you read Tom DeMarco's book, Slack, he talks about that extensively there, about how the importance of people in this kind of industry to have time when they're not actually busy. And it's time to think and reconceive and just kind of breathe. Take in the world around you, because we're building products that the world wants. And so if we're not in touch with the world around us, what are we building? We're building some nonsense that is just satisfying our own sense of, challenge. Like, this is a really hard algorithm to write, so I want to spend time on that. But we have to kind of pull out of that. It's great to get in there sometimes. It's lovely. But most of the time you have to pull out of that and you have to kind of look around at the world and say, what's going on here? What's going on and what can I contribute? So when we're looking at knowledge work, this is a very simplistic diagram, obviously. There's lots of different skills that we need inside businesses, but I think these are 2 worth calling out. People who are visionaries and the people who are makers. And they're not completely distinct from each other. One of the things I've noticed in all the years of consulting that I've done is we've got a lot of makers, a lot of really good makers inside organizations, and not many visionaries. Not many people who can really drive us forward with ideas. And when we don't have good ideas, we build poor products. Or we keep changing our mind all the time. Or we keep kind of responding to a single whim of a customer because they're the richest, or they're giving us the most money, or they're a stakeholder, or it's the CEO's mother, or something ridiculous. And honestly, I've actually experienced that for real. You've got to get this thing in. Steve's mum looked at this and she didn't understand how it works, and she's a real user, and so we have to. And suddenly everything had to stop for this one thing. It's not very visionary, that is. It's not a very visionary way of working. It's not very strategic. And so, we really need to encourage people to think more about what kinds of things they want to do and explore. And it's not about sitting in isolation and just thinking up ideas. It's about throwing things around. It's about playing. It's playing time. So we've got these visionaries and we've got these makers in an ideal situation. The visionaries may be the people that own the company, people that run the company. In a startup situation, someone's got a brilliant idea for something and he wants to pull a bunch of people together and get them working on it. And so there's, a visionary or 2 in there. Most of the people are the makers. But they're going to contribute ideas, and so there's some back and forth on that. So we've got a kind of crossover here. These people are coming together in collaboration. They're not siloed. They're not great ideas being documented in beautiful pictures and handed off, to the coding monkeys who are then going to just kind of rattle this stuff out. This is really, truly about collaboration. So crafting a business is about bringing people together in a spirit of collaboration. It's about breaking down silos. It's about not just silos of the organization itself, but silos in terms of where people work from. If you don't have the best collaboration tools in place to have people work together when they're remote, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. The pain of being in telephone conferences, many of you may know that. when you've got 5 or 6 people on a call, all in different locations in the world. No one knows who's actually talking because they all sound the same, especially in the USA. I can't tell. They all sound the same to me. And it's meaningless, you know, and I don't even know what these people are talking about half the time because I'm not even working on the same project as them. I just happen to have the same title. And so all of the, you know, Mr. X's come together, all of the program people, this or that. We're all going to have a big meeting and make sure we're aligned. But they're not doing that because no one cares. That's the thing. The person who called the meeting might care, but really most of the people at those meetings don't care. So bringing together people in collaboration it's a great idea to have people all in the same building, all in the same room. It's a great idea. You know, when I suggest that to organizations, I say, well, you've got these guys in India and you've got these guys in Spain and you've got these, you know, guys in Cuba or wherever they are. And it's great, you know, they're good developers, but wouldn't it be nice to, maybe you could bring them over here for a few weeks or something, or maybe you can have them work on their own projects and then we can have a co-located team in California that's going to work on something different, and they don't have to get on the phone every day. They go, yeah, but that's not how it works here. You know, and they don't really want to try because it's just like, it's challenging the status quo and it's rocking the boat to an extent where most people are not comfortable doing that. And the higher up you go in an organization, the harder it gets. You know, you'll get developers very willing to rock the boat, you know, and step out of line and challenge things. When you become a manager, you've got to be a bit more careful, right? Because, you know, you might not last too long because middle management is a vulnerable position when there are cuts in place. And so people get more and more cautious the higher they go up the organization. I'm trying to do some socializing of ideas, or perhaps convincing even, of a senior vice president in a large organization. I can't even get the guy to sit down and talk to me. You know, he does not see the importance of what we're trying to do. So it's a battle, it's an uphill battle. But ideally, I'd love to see all companies working in this way, a kind of explosion of ideas through bringing all these different people together and sharing what we know and what we think and what we feel. So I can talk here about these 5 principles for building new products, you know, 5 principles of business craftsmanship or something like that. And as I said, you know, I iterate through this, and I think maybe one of those is common with the first set of 5. It's always a set of 5. For some reason, a set of 5 is just memorable. You can remember a set of 5. And also, when I'm looking at some of these things, I'm thinking, well, is that really a principle, or is it just a way of behaving according to a principle? And so you kind of chisel down. It's almost like creating an abstract class. You know, when you write code, eventually you're writing code and you're finding you're doing some duplication, and you say, well, there's some commonalities here. I'm going to bring these all together into an abstract class, and then I'm going to extend that class. And so it's a little bit like doing that. And I think about Scrum that way too. You know, in Scrum we say we have to have daily meetings. But why? Why do we have daily meetings? You know, if you just say, okay, I'm going to have a daily meeting because it says so in the Scrum book, or I learned that on my CSM course, you're not going to get very far with that. I had an experience of a team that hated daily stand-up meetings. And I was puzzled. I thought, it's not that bad. It's 15 minutes of your day, and you get to talk to people who are working on the same thing as you, and you get to, you know, share what you're doing and what progress you're making. But it turned out they hated it because they were not a team. They were actually just like 7 or 8 people who happened to be reporting to the same manager, who were working on a very specialized component of a system for different products. So you have 2 developers working on this team over here, 1 developer working on this team over here, another guy working with India or something, you know. And so when they came together for their daily stand-up meeting, no one cared what anyone else was doing because they weren't involved in it. They weren't part of it. They didn't, you know, it didn't interest them. And so, of course they hate the stand-up meeting because it was a status reporting meeting. There was a so-called Scrum Master standing there, kind of, what did you do? Check, you know, what did you do? Okay, how many minutes have you got left on that piece of work? You know, minutes, how many seconds have you got? And checking all this stuff off and graphing it, and I exaggerate, of course, but you get the point. And that's not Agile, right? But they're doing it, they're one of the 71% of the companies doing Agile, I can assure you. Yeah. It's tragic, really. You know, people are being forced into these processes and these ways of working. They do not see the value in it. And if I was in a position like that, I wouldn't see the value in it either. But I tell you what I would do, I would seek it. and I'm not seeing a lot of seeking going on. I'm seeing there's resistance in those situations. This is a waste of time. We don't want to do this. Why do I have to go to these meetings? Why do I have to do this? And of course, when something is imposed on people, they will resist it. It has to come from a sense of wanting to change, I suppose. It has to come that the way we're working right now isn't the best way we can work. There are better ways, and let's begin to explore that. It's a very good idea when you go into an organization as a coach or consultant to start with a retrospective. Right? It's the first thing you do. What's working for you? What's not working for you? Because as soon as people start talking about what's not working, it starts to explode. And there's an awful lot of stuff that's not working for people, and they've just been putting up with. And so when you get where people are, you kind of know where to go with them. You know what the road forward is. But if you go in with one of those big diagrams and say, this is Scrum and we're all going to follow this, you're not going to have a lot of success with that. And I know that none of you do that, right? None of you do that. So let's look at these principles: purpose, focus. So some of them perhaps more on the visionary person's side, and some of them are perhaps more on the maker's side, but there's a lot of crossover here as well. Purpose, I would say, is something that the visionary people have to have. If you're starting a company and we're going to bring people together to build something, you've got to give them a clear vision and a clear purpose for this. Without that, they're going to flounder. They're going to kind of be all over the place. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. With some nice pictures. The purpose is where we're going and why we're going there. And actually, this is not just about the purpose of the products you're building or the purpose of the company. It's not just about mission statements. Every person who shows up to work has to have a purpose of why they're there. They have to know that. Where am I going in this job, and why am I going there? Why does this matter to me? Why does this job matter? And of course, one simple answer to that is, well, I get paid, and I need, I've got a family, and I have to support them, and I get health care, and all these other good things. And of course, that's one reason. But if that's the only reason, it's not going to be joyous. If it is, it's not going to be joyous for long. Some of you, I'm sure, have watched Dan Pink TED Talk on motivation, where there's just a ton of research since the 1950s that say knowledge workers are not motivated by money. They're not motivated by rewards. And yet we continue the idea that we'll reward our best performers and they will stay with us, and they will encourage others to become great. It actually doesn't work, and yet we keep doing it. So, what is the purpose of you going to work? Why do you work for the company you work for? And where are you heading? What does it matter? So that you're trying to find some alignment between, it's all about alignment. You're trying to find some alignment between your personal purpose and your organization's purpose. And if they clash, it may be okay. You may find ways through that. But if they clash to some big extent, then you probably don't want to work there anymore. I had a conversation last week with a woman who was with her husband at a different conference in Eastern Europe. And he was talking about her job, and he was saying what a useless job it was, or what a con of a job it was. And I thought it was so rude to be talking about your wife's work that way. And I said, what do you think about the work you do? She said, yeah, he's right. It is that. I won't go into what it was, but it was not a very honourable work. It was legal. It was legal work. It was working in a big organisation, but it wasn't very honourable. And I felt sad that that person felt that they had to keep doing that. Because if I was in that position, I couldn't do it, I don't think. I think I would rather be a little poor than be working in somewhere where I felt it was undermining my integrity. But yet, we put up with all kinds of things, and we can justify and find good reasons for doing that. But where's the purpose in that? If we ask ourselves the question, what is my purpose? We might find some interesting answers there, and we might find that it takes us on a different journey. So this one I love, and this is very much a principle that management should live by. I used to have a principle in this set of things which was self-organization. It was a good principle, but it's not a real principle, I think. I think it's just an outcome. You can only have self-organization if you are released into it. You probably, if you're a consultant or you've worked in an agile organization of any kind, have you ever had that question, how can I make my team self-organize? Anyone had that question? Well, how do I get my team to self-organize? It's a very management sort of driven idea that I have to get them to self-organize. Well, you can, but you can only do it by actually not doing anything, by just walking away, turning your back. Management by leaving the room is what's required. For self-organization to work, for people to be truly autonomous, Dan Pink in that TED Talk talks about the 3 qualities needed in the knowledge work industry. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. There's definitely a crossover here. But in order for people and teams to feel and be autonomous, they need to be released into the solution space. And very often when we see product backlogs or product owners, they're trying to kind of drive something in a particular way. And the requirements become not value statements so much as a sort of detailed requirements document about how something should be done. So we're not separating out the what and the how. If you give a team a clear vision, I'm not talking about the big vision of the whole organization or the whole product. A little vision, a story, a user story should be a vision of what could be at the end of this. And it has to be written in a way that it tells us what the value is we're getting from it. Years ago, it may be different now, I was doing a presentation, and I wanted to search for an example of a good user story. And I couldn't find one. It wasn't even that long ago. I could not find a good user story anywhere. Because they all stopped at the third part. They all said, as a, I want. And then some wishy-washy nonsense at the end. People don't get that. It's not, those first 2 parts are not the important parts. Well, the who is important. The what is not important. It's the who and the why. Who are we serving, and what value are we offering that person? And then you let the team, the developers, fill in the blank, essentially. The what and the how becomes part of what the team work on. That's their contribution to this. But they can't do it with any level of success if they don't know why they're doing it. So again, it comes back to purpose. So you have to release teams into the solution space. You have to let go. You lead by vision and goals. Inspiring, I have had managers in the past that have inspired me, but it's rare. It's really rare, unfortunately, and I don't know why. I've had other people in organizations, I've had peers in organizations who have inspired me. People who choose not to be managers because they see the downside of it. But there's certainly, you'll find leadership anywhere in an organization. You don't have to look to the appointed leaders to be led. You can be led by your peers. You can be led by a junior programmer who's just joined the organization because they're coming in with fresh ideas. All right? We get past this kind of idea of hierarchies and who's more important and who's more senior than who else. And we can really get into this idea of learning from everybody. But we can't do any of that if we're kind of bound by, reporting structures and quarterly reviews and all that kind of thing. It holds all of that back. And so how do managers, working within the system that they're in, because they're also in the system, how do they, working in that system, actually do this? How do they release their developers into a solution space? It's very, very challenging. And if you're a manager, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that or know of anything that's been written about this. Because the hard part for me, as I see it, is when we work in these big organizations, we're working in systems that are sometimes decades old, and people haven't been able to change them or haven't been willing to change them. And you're asking your manager, we're going to do Scrum now, and you need to release us into the solution space, and you're not allowed to watch us, you're not allowed to come to our meetings. And he says, well, I have to review you at the end of the quarter. So how do I do that? Because I can't see your work, and I'm not involved in your coding, I'm not involved in your assessments, and how do I do this? And it's very, very hard. And so again, we have to get into some kind of dialogue and figure that out, because ultimately we have to break the system. I mean, that is really the bottom line of this. We have to break the system. You cannot, for very long, work in a toxic system and expect to actually do Agile. It just cannot happen. And so really the movement of Agile has to be towards undermining these old kind of Taylor-esque systems that we still have in place in many of these big organizations. And if you're lucky enough to be working in a small startup company, good for you, Don't let it become like these big companies, because I see that happening too. These things start up and they're full of energy and power and great things are happening, and then they start growing and they think, oh, we better put some structure in place. And so they invite Accenture in or something like that, so just figure this out for us. Or they might invite an Agile person in, but it's the same thing, they want it fixed. Okay. So, third one is focus, of course. We talked about that a bit. Just do one thing at a time. I think that's one of the great gifts that Kanban has given this community, is this real focus on minimized work in progress. People were doing it in Scrum. They were kind of trying to get pieces of work done one at a time in the sprint, but it was too easy to break because you had 10 things lined up in your sprint and they all had to be done by the end. And, this idea of let's not do all of them at once, let's work on one thing. And you always hear the complaint, well, I've got nothing to do on that story because I'm an analyst, or I'm a designer, or I'm a tester, and there's nothing to test, so what do I do? It's like, think for yourself and figure it out, please. That's my answer to that. You're a developer. Everyone in an Agile development team is a developer. You're developing the product. That's what you're doing. That's your job. All right? So figure out what you can do to help. Swarm around these solutions. Get one thing done and move on to the next one. It's a pipeline, really, isn't it? If you're trying to jam too many things into a pipeline, it's going to clog. Nothing's going to get through. It's going to get through very, very, very slowly. This has been said right from the beginning in Agile. Kent Beck and Jeff Sutherland quotes there. I particularly like Jeff Sutherland's quote, actually. It's transforms scarcity into abundance. He told me a story one time about when he began to do Scrum. What he was observing in the organization was a culture of scarcity. There was never enough time, there was never enough money, there was never enough people to do what they wanted to do. And there wasn't, because they were trying to do 10 things, 10 different things, all at the same time. And so, I guess it was a result of reading that paper. I don't know, I'm not him. But the way I heard the story is that he went in one day and said, let's stop doing this, let's do one thing, or two things. And as a result of that, they suddenly had a culture of abundance. They had more than enough developers, they had more than enough money, and they had more than enough time. And they began to build software and release software. It went out the door. And it changed the culture. I mean, that's the key thing here, I think. People were no longer fearful that they weren't going to get stuff done. They knew they were going to get stuff done. They could go home at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, 5:30. They didn't have to stay working till midnight. They didn't have to come in at weekends. Because the stuff they were getting done was getting done. And eventually, everything moved faster. Those 10 projects they wanted to get done, they all got done. But they got done one at a time, rather than all at the same time, moving very, very slowly. A lot of people pride themselves on being multitaskers. And it's even in some job descriptions. We want someone to be a multitasker. Still, I think. Stanford did this research maybe 10 years ago or something. And they looked at multitasking and they ran some experiments and tried to assess, whether people were actually good at multitasking or not. And the conclusions they drew, very simply, was that no one is good at multitasking. Everyone is bad at multitasking. But there was one exception. The people that thought they were good at multitasking were worse than everybody else. I love that. I can't find that. I've been trying to find that research for years now, but I can't find it. And I'm wondering if I dreamt it. But even if I dreamt it, it's probably true, right? It's probably true. It's just that sense of like, yes, you can multitask, you can do lots of things at the same time, but with what quality are you doing them? If you're trying to cook a meal and, look after the baby and clean the house and get on the phone to your friend, all of those are going to be done badly. Rather than let me just do this one thing and do it really well. If we can get into that, we probably get more done when we do one thing at a time. How many of you keep personal Kanban boards at home? I'll own up to that one, all right? We have a personal Kanban board. And our lives go pretty well when we use it. And they don't go so well when we stop using it. We suddenly have too many things going on. Oh, I haven't got time for this, or I haven't got time for that. When the Kanban board is up there, and we're in progress done, we have so much time. And everything feels manageable. It's extraordinary. And even, this is the hard thing, even knowing that it works better when we use our personal Kanban board, we still don't use it all the time. We still use it less than we don't use it, I would say, in fact. And why is that? Because it's hard, right? It's hard. it's hard to motivate yourself to do the right thing, even when you know it's the right thing, even when you know it's going to give better results, because there's an element of laziness or something that kicks in, or you think, well, I'll do that tomorrow, but I've got this really important thing I have to do today, and I have to get that done. And I'm describing myself to you here, honestly. That's kind of how I function. And I have to really be conscious to try and not do that, because it's not my natural way of being. And so when I go into organizations and I see I've set up this great Scrum board for them and they can move all these things around and they've got all the metrics they need, and I come in a month later and they're not using it and I get mad, I have to look inward at that point. And I go, oh, I get it, you know. Yeah, it's hard to do this stuff. It really is. Which is why teamwork is good, by the way, because there's usually one or two people on a team that will kind of keep this motivated and keep it moving. And it isn't even the same two people all the time. It rotates around, you know. There's a sense of responsibility that kicks in there. So teamwork helps on that. But yeah, minimize the amount of work you do. It's that simple. And then this, of course, is in the maker's sphere. We're building new products. We've got some great vision and great ideas, but we don't know if these are possible. We don't know if they're practical. We don't know if we can do them with the technology that we have. So we start playing around. We start exploring. We start researching. We start prototyping. We come up with perhaps some really stupid ideas sometimes. And we talk a lot in the Agile space in facilitation and training about failure and how important failure is. That's not to say that we want to fail big. We want to fail, but we want to fail small. Agile Scrum helps you do that because it keeps things in a small time box. Allows us to try things out, experiment. The worst it's going to be is a 2-week failure rather than a 3-month or 6-month failure. So it's a playfulness around that. We want to take risks. If we don't take risks, we don't fail. So if you're not seeing any failure inside your organizations, it's probably because you're not taking any risks. And so you might want to challenge that. You know, we're a successful organization, we never fail. I wouldn't count that as a good thing. I would count that as a concern and something you want to start digging down into. Are you truly being inventive? And this last one is not something you usually see as a good quality, right? Confrontation. What do I mean by that? And I was searching around for a good image to use for this, and when you look for confrontation, you find angry people with their fists up or something, and people shouting at each other. That's not what I mean by confrontation. Confrontation is speaking the truth to authority. And I think that if a Scrum Master is nothing else, a Scrum Master is the person who speaks truth to authority. When I'm interviewing, as I'm doing at the moment for Scrum Masters, that's a requirement on the job description. You can speak truth to authority. Most people can't. It's very, very hard. It's hard for lots of reasons. It's hard because you're afraid of losing your job. But there's also many other reasons as well, cultural reasons and all kinds of things. But what we're looking for is courage, right? We're courage to speak up and say no and challenge things and say, I have a better way of doing this, or let's look for a better way of doing this. This doesn't feel like the right thing to be doing. But we have this very negative view of confrontation as if it's a bad thing, and we want to avoid confrontation. But I would say embrace it. If you're in a confrontational relationship with someone, there's probably something very powerful going on there that you want to explore. You want to dig below that kind of aggression on the surface and find out what's really going on down there. We want to be able to be brave and courageous and stand up for our principles and our integrity in the way that this guy did. Not to that extent. I'm not asking you to do that, obviously. But, when the rubber hits the road, what are you prepared to do? Are you prepared to just sit back and go, well, I can't change anything. It's just the way it is around here. This is the way we work in this organization. Or are you prepared to say, no, it's not how it should be. It might be how it is, but it doesn't mean it's how it has to be. And then you start looking at possibilities. You start opening up the dialogue. But you probably won't do that until you are able to stand up and say, and kind of confront the ugly situation or the wasteful situation or something like that. I kind of changed my view on this idea of confrontation when I was reading I guess it's a spiritual book, and they talked about confrontation as being the first step towards compassion. And that was such a novel idea to me. I never thought of it like that. You know, and an example might be if you have a friend or a relative who's addicted to drugs or is an alcoholic or something like that. People intervene in those situations. You know, you can watch that person go down for so far, and at some point, your family members are going to want to do something about it. An intervention is a confrontation. It's exactly what it is. And we do it for love. We do it because we are compassionate and we care about that person, and we cannot stand by and watch them destroy themselves any longer. That's the kind of confrontation that we need to be bringing into our organizations. The confrontation of love, not confrontation of anger and fear. It's almost time to wrap up, and I just like that picture. To me it says emergence, so I thought I'd throw that one in there. You know, principles, those principles, or principles like that way of thinking, that way of getting outside of this mechanistic, process-oriented approach that has been so prevalent over the last 10 or so years in our organization and still seems to be growing. You know, if we can get out of that and dig down into what we really truly value, and what we feel guide us through life, then we're going to emerge these incredible things. These incredible products are going to come out of that mindset. And it's not going to be by design. You know, we could never design the kinds of things that come about through a collaborative process. And 2 more slides. The essence of agility. It goes back to that little process diagram I had earlier. You know, it's just really simple, isn't it, doing Agile? We build stuff, we deliver it, and we learn from that, and then we repeat. And you do that bringing in the values and principles that you have in your real life. You know, we shouldn't be coming to work and leaving our values at home. Values of care, values of, you know, love for people, values of honesty. We often kind of feel that when we're in an organization we don't have to bring those with us, but we do. We don't bring them with us. No one else is going to supply them. It kind of comes down to us to do them. So, sure, we can follow this little simple process, but without all the other stuff, it's really not going to get us very far. And finally, I like this stepping stone analogy. I'll just close with a story that my colleague Boris Gloger tells when he runs Scrum courses. He uses it to illustrate the idea of retrospectives. And the story is that he claims his grandfather told him a story when he was a little boy. When he was a little boy, his grandfather told him a story about how he met and fell in love with, how he fell in love and met his wife, the grandmother. And they lived in some remote part of Germany, and the girlfriend lived on an island across a river, and they were forbidden to see each other because they were young, and it wasn't the done thing. And so the grandfather used to sneak out at night, and he wanted to go and, you know, meet up with his woman. And in order to get there, he had to cross the river, and the only way of crossing the river was on stepping stones. And he knew roughly where to go because she would leave the light on in her window crossing the island, and he knew that he had to get there, and there were these stepping stones, but it was pitch black. Right, so what he couldn't do, he couldn't just kind of jump across like that because he didn't know what was going to happen, and maybe there was some deep water and he was going to trip and he was going to fall and he was going to get hurt. So he couldn't do that. What he could do, though, he could just about see the next stone in front of him. So he would jump to the next stone, and he didn't know if it was going to be slippery or not, so he had to be careful. He'd jump to the next stone, he would stop, he would catch his balance, and he would check the light in the window where he was going to, and then he would look down for the next stone, and he would take the next stone, look at the light, and so on. And so that way he worked his way across the river, met his wife, they got married, they had a child, Boris was born, happy ever after. They were doing Scrum, essentially, all right? There's a vision, the light in the window, we don't know how we're going to get there, we're going to have to make it up as we go along, we're going to do some work, we're jump to the next stone, when we've done the work, we're going to stop, we're going to reflect on where we are. We're going to look around and make sure that we're heading in the right direction, that we're not going off to some other light in some other woman's house. We'll check that. And then we do it again. Make sure we're going towards the light, take the next stone. That's how Scrum works. And that's the importance of the retrospective. The retrospective is a place to stop and to breathe and to look around you and to take in your environment and to see that all is well. or all is not well, and you need to do something about it. Maybe sometimes he had to step back a stone in order to take a different stone. So that's why I use this. That's why I use this picture here. It's an emergent adventure, and really it is full of surprises, you know. And thank God for that. Thank you.
We have some minutes for some questions. If someone wants to, maybe someone can translate it.
I will just point out before that question that I finished bang on 6:30. Right, so time boxing. It was coincidental mostly, but it is 6:30. But if you want to hang around for a question or two.
Hi, Tobias. Thank you very much for your talk. But just one thing, when you used to start, you say business leaders need to be an artist. I think I come from creative and artist context, and I must say that artists and creative context, they are trying to stop to being artists at the same time. Like everybody...
They want to stop being artists.
Like, yeah, like these days, like everybody looks like they want to stop, or they want to become other stuff, right? Like you say, well, business leaders need to be artists. Well, artists look like they want to stop being artists and become another stuff.
What do they want to become? Business leaders?
Well, I don't know, but I know, for example, they want to work with other people. I know they are trying to find work systems, way of organizations and all this stuff. So I just want to say that like artists, or, you know, when, as I understood, like artists or creative, like to try to be other thing, I think Agile and all these SketchUps and all the things that you say, this is not Agile, well, from other contexts, actually from creativity and artist context, that's what exactly they need, you know, like system to work, a way of working, I mean, a way of organization and a way of, yeah.
Well, there's different kinds of artists. So I'm not thinking of the lone artist sitting in his ivory tower and producing great works alone. I'm thinking more of the collaborative artists, you know, Twyla Tharp, Alvin Ailey, the dancers, choreographers, people that do work with other people. You know, if you look at a dance company, that's an organization. It's a group of people. Usually in situations like that, the input of all of the people in the group is considered and listened to, and what the leader is doing is crafting some beautiful piece of work out of that input. And I think we need to lessons from that kind of an artist is what we need to bring into our organizations. You know, I think of the business leader is almost like a sculptor, except he's not using clay, he's using people. That sounds horrible, but using the energy of people. You're kind of crafting the energy of people, sculpting the energy of people. That's the kind of artist. And maybe artists can learn something from what we do in the Agile world too, and I have no doubt about that. Yeah. So I'm right at the back there.
The other day at work, something interesting happened. There was a meeting, it was a high-stakes meeting, and the senior VP came over and he did something that was interesting. He said he played the drive-by VP. So he just went in the meeting and he told us that what we're going to decide later on was going to be very important, and he told us why it was important, and then he just left. And he left us to decide. So I think that was very in tune to what you're saying, and I was wondering how often do you see something like this, and how does a person in that high up in the hierarchy do what you propose?
But he did it.
Yeah, he did. So he went in.
So the question of how he can do it, I guess you've given the answer, and it's simply you just do it.
I want more answers. I want more options.
I don't know. I think it depends on the level of courage of each of the individual people. How much do they trust the team of people they're working with? Perhaps in the situation you described, he had a very high trust level for those people working with him, that he knew that if he left them alone, something would get done. But the trouble is, in a lot of organizations, there's a sort of... people leave and people join. There's a lot of new hiring, there's a lot of people leaving. So you never build up that level of trust with people. We hire people because we trust they can do the work. But trust is a complex thing. There's lots of different kinds of trust. I might feel that you're competent to do the work, but do I know that you're going to do it? Even though you can do it doesn't mean you will do it. Do I trust you to work well with other people in the group? And so if you've kind of got this constant flow of people coming and going into the teams, we can never really get to that situation, I think, where you're talking about. If I was a manager, I'd have a hard time, I think, letting go to an ever-changing team than I would to a team that I felt was kind of steady. It's harder to do that. It might be that the newly formed team, the changing team, actually does a lot better if that manager does let go of it, but it's really quite a hard thing to ask people to do. It doesn't mean they shouldn't do it, but we have to recognize as people wanting that from them that there's some challenges involved in that. I think we should wrap up. We're on time, right? Because I know that some people are needing to leave early, and I'd rather kind of wrap it up now than end up speaking just to one person left in the room at 9 o'clock tonight.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Yeah.